David Chen was wiping down the whiteboard when he heard it, a small, muffled sound coming from the storage closet at the back of his classroom. He froze, marker still in hand, listening. There it was again. A hiccup maybe, or a stifled cough. It was 5:30 on a Friday afternoon in December, the school empty except for the janitor making rounds on the second floor, and David had been certain he was alone. He set down the marker and walked slowly toward the closet, his footsteps echoing in the silent classroom. "Hello?" he called out softly. "Is someone in there?" The sound stopped immediately. David waited, counting to 10 in his head the way he did when his students needed a moment to compose themselves. Then he opened the door. A little girl sat wedged between boxes of construction paper and old textbooks, her knees pulled up to her chest, her eyes wide with fear. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Her jacket was too thin for winter, dirty and torn at one sleeve. Her dark hair was tangled, her face smudged with what looked like days of grime. She was shivering. David's teacher instincts kicked in before his common sense could catch up. He knelt down slowly, making himself smaller, less threatening. "Hey there," he said gently. "I'm Mr. Chen. This is my classroom. Are you okay?" The girl stared at him but didn't speak. Her lips were chapped, and David could see her hands were red and raw from the cold. How long had she been in there? The school had been closed for hours before his last class ended. "Are you hurt?" he tried again. Still nothing. "Are you hungry?" At that word, something flickered in her eyes. David stood carefully and walked to his desk, pulling out his lunch bag. He packed extra today, he always did on Fridays, knowing the weekend meant some of his students wouldn't eat properly until Monday. He pulled out a sandwich, an apple, and a juice box. "I'm going to leave this here on my desk," he said, setting the food down. "You can come out when you're ready. I'll just be over here grading papers, okay? You're safe, I promise." He sat at his desk and made a show of opening his gradebook, but his mind was racing. He needed to call someone: the principal, social services, the police. But something stopped him. The look in that little girl's eyes. He'd seen it before, in his own son's eyes 4 years ago when Jessica died. The look of someone who'd lost everything and didn't know how to ask for help. After 5 minutes that felt like an hour, the girl emerged from the closet. She moved like a scared animal, ready to bolt at any sudden movement. She approached the desk sideways, never taking her eyes off David, and grabbed the sandwich. She ate it standing up, too fast, like she hadn't eaten in days. When she finished, she picked up the apple and the juice box and held them against her chest like treasures. "What's your name?" David asked softly. The girl looked at him for a long moment, then whispered, "Sophie." "That's a beautiful name. I'm David. Well, Mr. Chen at school, but you can call me David if you want." He gestured to the chair next to his desk. "Do you want to sit down, Sophie? You look tired." She did sit, perching on the edge of the chair like she might need to run. Up close, David could see she was younger than he'd first thought, maybe 6 or 7. Despite the dirt and the fear, there was something about her bearing that suggested she hadn't always been this way. The way she sat, the way she held the apple, there was carefulness there, manners that had been taught and learned. "Sophie, do your parents know where you are?" She shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "Are you lost?" Another head shake. "Did you run away from somewhere?" A pause, then a small nod. David's heart sank. He pulled out his phone slowly, trying not to spook her. "I need to call some people who can help you, okay? People who will make sure you're safe and warm tonight." "No." The word burst out of her, sharp and desperate. She stood up so fast the chair scraped against the floor. "Please don't send me back there. Please, I'll be good, I promise. I'll stay quiet. You won't even know I'm here." "Sophie, sweetheart, I can't just leave you. I can't go back." She was crying now, big tears rolling down her dirty cheeks. "They don't want me there. Nobody wants me. But I'll stay out of your way, I promise, please." David felt something crack in his chest. He'd been a teacher for 12 years, and he'd seen plenty of kids in bad situations. But there was something about this little girl, something about the way she was begging, that reminded him so much of Ethan after Jessica died. That same desperation, that same certainty that the world was a dangerous place and nobody could be trusted. He made a decision that his logical brain told him was probably stupid, but his heart insisted was right. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay, Sophie, I'm still going to make a phone call, but I'm going to talk to them about you staying with me tonight. Just tonight, until we figure things out. Is that okay?" She nodded, hiccuping through her tears. David called his principal first, then social services. It took an hour of phone calls and explanations, but eventually they worked out a temporary arrangement. David had been a teacher at Riverside Elementary for over a decade, had a spotless record, and the social worker admitted they were overwhelmed with cases and short on emergency foster placements. Sophie could stay with him for the weekend while they investigated her situation. "Do you have somewhere to take her?" the social worker asked. "Family? Children?" "I have a son," David said. "He's 9. It's just the two of us." "That should be fine. We'll need to do a home visit on Monday, and we'll need Sophie's full name and any information she can give us about where she came from." David looked at Sophie, who was sitting in the chair watching him with those huge, fearful eyes. "We'll work on that," he said. The drive home was quiet. Sophie sat in the back seat of David's old Honda, staring out the window at the December darkness. David kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, trying to figure out what to tell Ethan. His son had been asking for a sibling since he was 5, but David had gently explained that it was just going to be the two of them. And now he was bringing home a little girl who needed help, and he had no idea if this was going to make things better or worse. Their apartment was on the 3rd floor of a modest building in a neighborhood that had seen better days but was still safe. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that opened into a living room dominated by bookshelves and Ethan's art projects covering the walls. It wasn't much, but it was home. It was all David could afford on a teacher's salary. Ethan looked up from his homework when they walked in. His eyes went wide when he saw Sophie. "Dad? Who's this?" "This is Sophie," David said carefully. "She's going to stay with us for a little while. She needs help, and we're going to help her. Okay?" Ethan looked at Sophie, taking in her dirty clothes and scared expression, and something softened in his face. David saw his son make the same decision he'd made in the classroom to choose kindness over questions. "Cool," Ethan said. "Do you like dinosaurs? I have like a million dinosaur books." Sophie blinked, surprised. I don't know. Well, we're going to find out. Come on, I'll show you." Just like that, the tension broke. Ethan took Sophie's hand, the one not clutching the apple, and led her to his room. David heard him chattering away about T-Rexes and velociraptors, and Sophie's soft, uncertain responses. David stood in the kitchen and took a deep breath. What had he just done? He'd brought home a child he knew nothing about, a little girl who was clearly running from something. But as he listened to Ethan's excited voice and Sophie's tentative laugh, he thought maybe he'd done the right thing. Maybe. He ordered pizza for dinner, Ethan's favorite, and Sophie ate 3 slices like she was starving. After dinner, David ran a bath for her while Ethan found some of his old clothes that might fit. Sophie was small for her age, thin in a way that spoke of missed meals. The clothes hung on her, but they were clean and warm. When she emerged from the bathroom with her hair damp and combed, wearing Ethan's old Superman pajamas, she looked like a different child. Without the layers of dirt, David could see she had delicate features, dark eyes that were too old for her face, and a small scar above her left eyebrow. "Better?" David asked. She nodded, then did something that surprised him. She walked over to where he was sitting on the couch and hugged him, just wrapped her small arms around his neck and held on tight. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not sending me away." David felt his throat tighten. He hugged her back gently. "You're welcome, sweetheart. You're safe here." That night, Sophie slept in Ethan's room. David gave Ethan his bed and took the couch, but he barely slept. He kept thinking about Sophie, about where she'd come from, about what had happened to make a little girl so desperate that she'd hide in the school storage closet. The weekend passed in a strange, tentative peace. Sophie slowly relaxed, started talking more, started smiling at Ethan's jokes. She helped set the table without being asked, said please and thank you, and knew how to use a knife and fork properly. She'd been taught by someone who cared about manners. She was also clearly educated. She could read at a level far above her age, and she knew things that homeless kids usually didn't know. On Sunday night, after the kids were in bed, David tried again to get information from Sophie. He sat on the edge of Ethan's bed where she was curled up with Mr. Seast. Bear, the stuffed animal Ethan had insisted she should have. "Sophie," he said gently, "I need to know your full name, and I need to know about your family. The social worker is coming tomorrow, and they're going to ask questions." Sophie was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "My mommy worked in a tall building with glass. She wore pretty clothes and everyone listened when she talked." "Worked?" Past tense. "She doesn't work anymore. She went away." "Went away where, sweetheart?" "To the hospital. The one with the quiet rooms and the sad people." Sophie's voice was small, matter of fact. They said she was sick in her head, that she couldn't take care of me anymore. They took me to a place with lots of kids, but it was loud and scary and nobody wanted me. David felt like he'd been punched in the gut. So you ran away? I waited for Mommy to come get me, but she never came. I thought maybe she forgot about me, or maybe she didn't want me anymore because I made her sick. Sophie, no. They said I had to go to a different place, a temporary place, but I didn't want to. So I ran. I walked a long time. I slept in parks and behind stores. Then I found the school and it was warm, so I hid in the closet. I thought if I was very quiet, nobody would find me and I could stay. David's hands were shaking. This little girl had been on the streets for weeks, surviving alone, because she thought her mother had abandoned her. Sophie, what's your last name? She looked at him with those two old eyes. Valentine. My name is Sophie Valentine. If you're feeling this story so far, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart. David waited until Sophie was asleep, then he pulled out his laptop. His hands were trembling as he typed. Sophie Valentine, missing child. The first result was a news article from 6 months ago. The headline made his blood run cold. CEO Catherine Valentine hospitalized following apparent suicide attempt. Daughter placed in protective custody. He clicked through article after article, piecing together the story. Catherine Valentine, 34 years old, CEO of Valentine Industries, a tech company worth hundreds of millions, married to Michael Valentine, a journalist. One daughter, Sophie, age 6. Then, 8 months ago, a home invasion, Michael Valentine killed. Sophie Valentine, witness to her father's murder, found hiding in a bedroom closet. Catherine had taken leave from her company to care for Sophie. But 3 months later, Catherine had been found unconscious in her penthouse from an overdose of sleeping pills, ruled a suicide attempt, though Catherine's lawyer claimed it was accidental. Either way, Child Protective Services had removed Sophie from her mother's care during the mandatory psychiatric hold. The last article was from 3 months ago. Sophie Valentine, daughter of CEO Catherine Valentine, missing from foster care placement, police searching. Mother, recently released from psychiatric treatment, unable to locate daughter. David sat back, his heart pounding. Sophie had been missing for 3 months. Her mother had been searching for her, and she'd been hiding in his classroom, thinking nobody wanted her. He looked at the photos in the articles. Catherine Valentine, before the tragedy, beautiful, poised, confident in designer suits and perfect makeup. Catherine Valentine, after gaunt, haunted, photographed, leaving the psychiatric facility looking broken. And Sophie, a smiling little girl in a photo from before her father's death. Nothing like the scared, dirty child he'd found in his closet. David should call the police immediately. Should call CPS. Should make sure Catherine Valentine knew her daughter was safe. But as he stared at his laptop screen, all he could think about was the look on Sophie's face when she'd asked him not to send her away, the way she'd hugged him tonight, the sound of her laughing at Ethan's dinosaur impressions. He'd grown attached in just 3 days. He could admit that. And so had Ethan, who'd been happier this weekend than David had seen him in months, thrilled to have someone to play with, someone to take care of. When Catherine Valentine came to take Sophie back and she would come, David knew that it was going to break both their hearts. But Sophie deserved to be with her mother, deserved to know that Catherine hadn't abandoned her, that she'd been searching desperately, deserved to have her real family back. David found Catherine's contact information on the Valentine Industries website. There was a general number, an email address for her assistant. He could call in the morning, explain everything, arrange a meeting. He closed the laptop and walked to Ethan's room. Through the crack in the door, he could see Sophie curled up next to Ethan, both of them sleeping peacefully. Mr. Baird tucked between them. They looked like siblings, like they belonged together. David's chest ached. He'd lost Jessica 4 years ago, and he'd learned to live with that grief by focusing entirely on Ethan. He told himself they were fine, just the two of them, that they didn't need anyone else. But watching Ethan with Sophie this weekend, seeing his son laugh and play and take care of someone else, David realized how much Ethan had been missing, how much they'd both been missing. And now he had to make a call that would take it all away. But it was the right thing to do. He knew it was. Sophie needed her mother, and Catherine needed Sophie. He could see that in the articles, in the desperation in Catherine's eyes, in those later photos. She hadn't abandoned her daughter. She'd been broken by grief and trauma, had made a mistake, and had been trying to fix it ever since. David went back to the living room and picked up his phone. It was late, almost midnight, but this couldn't wait. He dialed the number for Catherine Valentine's assistant, expecting to get voicemail. A woman answered on the second ring. Valentine Industries. Her voice was tired, hoarse. I'm looking for Catherine Valentine. My name is David Chen. I'm calling about her daughter. There was a sharp intake of breath. This is Catherine. You found Sophie? Is she alive? Is she safe? Please tell me she's safe. The desperation in her voice cut through David like a knife. This was a mother who'd been living in hell, not knowing if her child was dead or alive. She's safe, David said quickly. She's with me. She's been staying with me for the past 3 days. She's healthy, she's fed, she's sleeping right now in my son's room. He heard a sound that might have been a sob. Thank God. Thank God. Where are you? I'm coming right now. Give me your address. David did, and Catherine Valentine said she'd be there in 30 minutes. Then she hung up, and David was left standing in his small living room, knowing that in half an hour, everything was going to change. He checked on the kids one more time. They were still sleeping, peaceful and safe. He didn't wake them. Didn't want to shatter this last moment of innocence before reality came crashing back in. 28 minutes later, there was a knock on his door. David opened it and came face to face with Catherine Valentine. She looked nothing like the polished CEO from the early photos. She was thin, almost gaunt, wearing jeans and a sweater that hung off her frame. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She had no makeup on, and her eyes were red and swollen like she'd been crying for hours, maybe months. But she was still beautiful, in that devastating way that grief makes people beautiful, raw and real, and achingly human. Where is she? Catherine's voice cracked. Please, I need to see her. She's sleeping, David said. Come in, we should talk first. Catherine stepped inside, her eyes darting around the small apartment like she was looking for Sophie in every corner. Is she okay? Did she tell you what happened? Has she been eating? She's okay. Physically, she's fine. Emotionally, David gestured to the couch. Please, sit. This is going to be hard to hear. Catherine Valentine sat on the edge of David's worn couch like she might shatter if she moved too quickly. Her hands were trembling, clasped together so tightly her knuckles had gone white. David sat across from her in the armchair, the same one where he'd graded papers every night for 4 years and tried to find the right words to explain what her daughter had been through. She's been on the streets for almost 3 months, David said quietly. She ran away from the foster placement. She told me she waited for you to come get her, but when you didn't, she thought you'd forgotten about her, or that she'd made you sick and you didn't want her anymore. Catherine made a sound like she'd been shot. Her hand went to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. No, 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 no. I've been looking for her every single day. The foster system said she ran away, but they didn't know where. They lost track of her in the system, and I've been going insane trying to find her. I hired private investigators. I checked hospitals and shelters and showed her picture to everyone I could find. I never stopped looking. I never stopped wanting her. David's throat tightened. He could hear the raw desperation in her voice, see the months of hell written in every line of her face. She doesn't know that. She thinks you abandoned her. I need to see her. I need to tell her. She's in my son's room. But Ms. Valentine, Catherine, you should know that when I told her I was calling someone to help her, she panicked. She begged me not to send her back. She's terrified of being taken away again. Catherine stood up, swaying slightly. David stood too, ready to catch her if she fell. Which room? David led her down the short hallway to Ethan's bedroom. He opened the door slowly, and the light from the hallway spilled across the 2 children sleeping in the twin bed. Ethan was sprawled out like he always slept, taking up more than his share of space. Sophie was curled into a small ball next to him. Mr. Bear clutched to her chest, her dark hair fanned across the pillow. Catherine took 3 steps into the room, and then her legs gave out. She fell to her knees beside the bed, one hand covering her mouth to stifle the sobs. She reached out with her other hand, trembling, and gently touched Sophie's hair. Just touched it, like she was afraid Sophie might disappear if she pressed too hard. My baby, Catherine whispered. My baby girl. Sophie stirred at the touch. Her eyes opened slowly, confused by the light and the presence of someone new. She blinked, focused on the woman kneeling beside her bed, and went completely still. Mommy? The word came out small, uncertain. Yes, sweetheart, it's Mommy. I'm here. I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. For a moment, nothing happened. Sophie just stared at her mother like she was seeing a ghost. Then her face crumpled and she started crying deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. but she didn't move toward Catherine. Instead, she scrambled backward, pressing herself against the wall, shaking her head. No, no, you'll send me away again. You'll leave again. Everyone leaves. Catherine's face went white. Sophie, no. I didn't send you away. They took you from me when I was sick. I've been trying to find you ever since. I never wanted you to go. Never. You were supposed to come get me. Sophie was crying so hard she could barely speak. I waited, and you never came. I thought you didn't love me anymore because I made you sad. Because of what happened to Daddy. David saw Ethan wake up, confused and scared by the noise. He moved quickly, gently taking his son's hand and leading him out of the room. Come on, buddy. Let's give them some space. Dad, what's happening? Why is Sophie crying? That's her mom. They need to talk. David closed the door partway, giving them privacy but staying close enough to intervene if needed. Through the crack in the door, he could hear Catherine's voice, raw with emotion. Sophie, listen to me. Please, baby, listen. What happened to Daddy wasn't your fault. It was never your fault. And me being sad, me getting sick, that wasn't your fault either. I love you more than anything in this world. You're my whole heart. I never stopped wanting you. I never stopped looking for you. Then why didn't you find me? Sophie's voice was muffled, like she had her face buried in the pillow. Because they wouldn't tell me where you were. The people who were supposed to take care of you, they lost track of you when you ran away. I've been searching everywhere. I barely slept. I've barely eaten. All I could think about was finding you and bringing you home. There was a long silence. David held his breath. Ethan pressed against his side, listening too. Do you still want me? Sophie's voice was so small David almost didn't hear it. More than anything, you're my daughter. You're my Sophie. Nothing will ever change that. Another silence, longer this time. Then David heard movement, and when he glanced through the crack in the door, he saw Sophie had moved closer to Catherine, not touching, but closer. Progress. Where were you? Sophie asked. After they took me away? Catherine's voice shook. I was in a hospital, a place for people whose hearts are so broken they can't figure out how to keep living. I missed your daddy so much, and I missed you so much when they took you, that I just wanted everything to stop hurting. So I made a mistake. I took too much medicine to help me sleep. I didn't mean to, I just wanted the pain to stop for a little while. Were you trying to go to heaven with Daddy? The question hung in the air like smoke. David heard Catherine's sharp intake of breath. Maybe. I don't know. I wasn't thinking clearly. All I knew was that Daddy was gone and you were gone, and I didn't know how to be in the world without both of you. Catherine's voice broke. But then I woke up in the hospital, and I realized I'd made everything worse. Because now I couldn't get to you. And I thought about what your daddy would say if he could see me giving up. He'd be so disappointed. And I thought about you, growing up without either of us. That's when I decided I had to get better. I had to get strong again so I could find you and bring you home. Sophie was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that made David's chest ache. I thought about going to heaven too. When I was sleeping outside and it was really cold, I thought maybe if I went to heaven I could see Daddy again and you wouldn't have to be sad about me anymore. Catherine made a sound like a wounded animal. Oh, baby, no. Sophie, no. You're the reason I'm still here. You are the only thing that kept me alive. Losing you would destroy me. Do you understand? You didn't make me sick. You're what makes me want to get better. David heard movement and risked another glance. Sophie had moved into Catherine's arms, and Catherine was holding her like she'd never let go. Both of them were crying, Catherine rocking Sophie gently back and forth. I'm sorry I ran away, Sophie sobbed against her mother's shoulder. I'm sorry I made you worry. You don't have to be sorry. You were scared. You didn't understand. That's my fault, not yours. Catherine pulled back enough to cup Sophie's face in her hands. I'm here now. I'm not leaving. Even if you're angry at me. Even if it takes time for you to trust me again. I'm not going anywhere. Sophie searched her mother's face, looking for the lie, the catch, the moment when this would all fall apart. But whatever she saw, there must have satisfied her because she buried her face back in Catherine's shoulder and whispered, I missed you, Mommy. I missed you too, baby. So much. Every single day. David quietly pulled the door closed and led Ethan to the living room. His son looked up at him with wide, worried eyes. Is Sophie leaving? David sat on the couch and pulled Ethan into his lap, even though he was really getting too big for it. She's with her mom now, her real mom, who loves her very much. But she can stay here too, right? She can stay with us? I don't think so, buddy. She needs to be with her family. Ethan's face crumpled. But we're her family too now. She's my sister. I shared my bed and my dinosaurs and Mr. Bear. You can't just take her away. David felt like his heart was being torn in two. I know it hurts. But sometimes loving someone means letting them go back to where they belong. That's stupid, Ethan said, crying now. Why does everyone always leave? First Mom, now Sophie. It's not fair. David held his son while he cried, feeling his own tears starting to fall. Ethan was right. It wasn't fair. None of it was fair. But that's how life worked sometimes. You found something precious, and then you had to let it go. They sat there for almost an hour before Catherine emerged from Ethan's room, carrying Sophie in her arms. Sophie's face was blotchy from crying, but she looked more peaceful than David had seen her all weekend. She had her arms wrapped around Catherine's neck, her face pressed against her mother's shoulder. Catherine's eyes were red and swollen, but there was something different in her face now. A light that hadn't been there when she'd arrived, like someone had switched her back on after months of darkness. Thank you, Catherine said to David, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know how to thank you for keeping her safe, for taking care of her when I couldn't. You don't need to thank me, David said. Anyone would have done the same. No. Catherine shook her head firmly. Not anyone. Most people would have just called the police and let the system handle it. You brought her into your home. You let your son share his bed with her. You fed her and made her feel safe. That's not nothing. If you're feeling the emotion of this moment, hit that subscribe button because you need to see how this family finds their way back to each other. Sophie lifted her head from Catherine's shoulder and looked at David and Ethan. Do I have to go right now? Catherine tensed, and David could see the fear flash across her face. The fear that Sophie would choose to stay with him instead of going home with her. We should go home, sweetheart. I have your room already. All your toys are there, and your books. And I know. But can I say goodbye first? Relief washed over Catherine's face. Of course you can. Sophie wiggled down from Catherine's arms and walked over to Ethan. She looked at him seriously. Thank you for sharing your dinosaurs. Ethan wiped his eyes. You can keep Mr. Bear if you want, so you won't be scared at night. Sophie hugged the stuffed animal tighter. Really? Yeah, friends share. Sophie threw her arms around Ethan's neck. You the best almost brother ever. Then she turned to David and hugged him too. Thank you for not sending me away. Thank you for the pizza and the bath and for calling my mommy. David knelt down to her level, his throat tight. You take care of yourself, okay? And if you ever need anything, you tell your mom to call me. Sophie nodded solemnly, then went back to Catherine's side. Catherine took her hand, and they walked toward the door. Catherine paused with her hand on the doorknob and turned back to David. Can I ask you something? She said quietly. Of course. Would it be okay if I brought Sophie back to visit? I know Ethan would probably like to see her, and I think Sophie might need some time to adjust, and having familiar faces around might help. David saw Ethan's face light up with hope. He knew he should probably say no, should make a clean break so Ethan wouldn't get more attached. But he found himself nodding. Yeah, that would be okay. Catherine gave him a smile that was still sad but genuine. Thank you. I'll call you tomorrow? Tomorrow, David agreed. He and Ethan stood in the doorway watching Catherine and Sophie walk down the hall to the elevator. Sophie looked back once, waving at Ethan, and then they were gone. David closed the door and looked at his son. Ethan was crying again, silent tears rolling down his face. David pulled him into a hug. I know, buddy. I know it's hard. She's coming back though, right? She promised. I think so, David said, though he wasn't entirely sure. Rich people made promises all the time that they didn't keep. And Catherine was wealthy beyond anything David could imagine. Once she got Sophie home, got her settled back into her old life, would she really bring her back to visit a teacher and his son in their tiny apartment? Would Sophie even want to come back? But the next day, Catherine called. And the day after that, by the end of the week, a pattern had emerged. Catherine would call in the afternoon to check in, to tell David how Sophie was doing, to ask his advice about things. Sophie was having nightmares. Should Catherine call a therapist? Sophie wasn't eating much. What had David fed her that she'd actually enjoyed? Sophie kept asking about Ethan. Would it be okay if they came over on Saturday? David found himself looking forward to those phone calls. Catherine's voice became familiar, comforting. She was different on the phone than he'd imagined a CEO would be. She was vulnerable, honest about her struggles, grateful for his help. She talked about Sophie, but she also talked about herself, about how lonely the penthouse felt. How strange it was to be back in the world after months of isolation. How hard it was to figure out how to be a mother again when she felt like she'd failed so catastrophically. And David found himself opening up too, about Jessica, about the car accident that had taken her, about the first year after when he barely held it together, about the loneliness of single parenthood, the exhaustion, the constant worry that he wasn't enough for Ethan. They understood each other in a way that felt rare and precious. Saturday came and Catherine showed up at 3 with Sophie and a bag of groceries. "I thought maybe we could make dinner together," she said hesitantly. "If that's not too presumptuous. I just thought, Sophie's been talking about the pizza you ordered, and I wanted to show her I can cook too, even though I'm honestly terrible at it." David laughed. "Come in. Ethan's been bouncing off the walls waiting for you." Sophie and Ethan disappeared into his room immediately, and David found himself in the kitchen with Catherine Valentine, CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, trying to figure out how to make spaghetti. She really was terrible at cooking. She burned the garlic, forgot to salt the water, and somehow managed to splash tomato sauce on both of them. But she was laughing, really laughing, in a way that transformed her face. "I don't know how you do this every day. I have staff who cook for me, and I still can't figure out basic pasta." "It's not that hard once you get the hang of it," David said, reaching around her to adjust the heat on the stove. He was suddenly very aware of how close they were standing, of the smell of her perfume, of the way her shoulder brushed against his arm. He stepped back quickly. "Here, you stir while I check on the kids." Dinner was chaotic and messy and wonderful. Sophie and Ethan talked over each other telling stories, and Catherine looked at her daughter with such pure love that it made David's chest ache. This was what Sophie needed. This was what Catherine needed. A chance to be a family again. After dinner, Catherine helped clean up while the kids played in the living room. She washed dishes while David dried, and they fell into an easy rhythm. "Can I tell you something?" Catherine said quietly, her hands still in the soapy water. "Of course. I was afraid to come here today. Afraid that Sophie wouldn't want to leave, that she'd be happier with you than with me." David set down the dish towel and turned to face her. "Catherine, Sophie loves you. Anyone can see that. But she's comfortable here. She knows your routine." Ethan makes her laugh. "And you," Catherine's voice caught, "you saved her. You gave her safety when I couldn't. How am I supposed to compete with that? You're not competing. You're her mother. That's not something anyone can compete with or replace." David paused, choosing his words carefully. "I lost my wife 4 years ago. Ethan was 5. And for a long time, I thought I had to be both parents for him. I had to be enough all by myself. But the truth is, no one person can be everything for a child. They need multiple people who love them. Teachers, friends, family. Sophie is lucky because she has you. But she's also lucky because now she has Ethan and me too. That doesn't diminish you. It just means she has more people in her corner." Catherine looked at him with shining eyes. "How are you so wise?" "I'm not wise. I'm just a single dad who's been figuring it out as I go along." He smiled. "Same as you." Catherine reached out and squeezed his hand. Just for a moment, just long enough for him to feel the warmth of her skin, the slight tremor in her fingers. "Thank you. For everything." The weeks went by and the visits continued. Once a week at first, then twice. Sometimes Catherine and Sophie came to David's apartment. Sometimes David and Ethan went to Catherine's new place. She'd sold the penthouse, the one with all the memories of Michael and the life before, and bought a house in a quiet neighborhood. Not a mansion, just a real house with a yard and rooms that felt lived in. David watched Catherine transform. The hollow look in her eyes faded. She started smiling more, laughing more. She told him she'd gone back to work part-time, that she was in therapy, that for the first time in 8 months she felt like she might actually be okay. And Sophie was healing too. The nightmares became less frequent. She gained weight, filled out, started to look like a normal 7-year-old instead of a scared street kid. She still had moments of panic when Catherine was out of sight for too long. Still woke up sometimes asking if her mother was going to send her away. But those moments were fewer and farther between. One evening in February, after the kids had fallen asleep watching a movie on Catherine's couch, David and Catherine sat in her kitchen drinking tea. It had become their ritual. The kids would fall asleep, and they'd talk for hours about everything and nothing. Their childhoods, their marriages, their fears and hopes, and all the messy parts of being human. "I need to tell you something," Catherine said, wrapping her hands around her mug, "and I need you to really hear me, because it's been building for weeks, and I can't keep it inside anymore." David's heart started pounding. he knew what was coming. He'd felt it too, the shift in the air between them, the way their conversations had become more intimate, the way they found excuses to touch a hand on an arm, shoulders brushing as they cooked, fingers grazing when they reached for the same dish. "I've been alone for a long time," Catherine continued, her eyes on her tea. "Even before Michael died, we were alone together. He was traveling, I was working, we were two people living parallel lives. And after he died, after everything that happened, I thought I would never feel anything again. I thought that part of me had died too." She looked up at David, and the vulnerability in her eyes took his breath away. "But then you happened, you and Ethan. And somewhere between the phone calls and the dinners and the conversations at midnight, I realized I was feeling things again. Not just about Sophie, but about you." She took a shaky breath. "I've fallen in love with your kindness, with the way you love your son, with your patience and your wisdom, and the way you make me feel like I'm not crazy for struggling. I've fallen in love with you, David. And I know this is complicated. I know I'm still healing, and you are too. But I couldn't keep pretending I don't feel this way." David sat frozen for a moment, his heart hammering so hard he thought she must be able to hear it. Then he reached across the table and took her hand. "I've been in love with you for weeks," he admitted. "Maybe since that first phone call when you were so desperate to know if Sophie was okay. Maybe since you showed up at my apartment and fell to your knees beside her bed. I don't know exactly when it happened, but it did. And I've been terrified to say anything because I didn't want to mess this up. You're a CEO, and I'm just a teacher. You live in this beautiful house, and I live in a cramped apartment. What could I possibly offer you?" Catherine laughed, tears streaming down her face. "What could you offer me, David? You gave me back my daughter. You gave me back my life. You've shown me what it means to be strong and humble and present. You've made me feel like I'm not alone anymore." She squeezed his hand. "I don't care about money or status or any of that. I care about this, about us, about building something real." David stood up, pulled her to her feet, and kissed her. It was soft and tentative and full of promise. When they pulled apart, they were both crying. "So what do we do now?" Catherine whispered. "I guess we figure it out together," David said. "One day at a time, no rush. We let the kids adjust. We take it slow, but we don't pretend anymore that this is just about them." Catherine smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing David had ever seen. "Together," she agreed. 2 months later, on a Saturday afternoon in April, David and Ethan helped Catherine plant flowers in her backyard while Sophie directed the operation like a tiny foreman. The kids had dirt on their faces and leaves in their hair, and Catherine's expensive jeans had mud on both knees. She looked nothing like the polished CEO from the articles. She looked happy. David stood back, watching his son and Sophie arguing over whether the red flowers or the yellow flowers should go in front, and felt something settle in his chest. Peace, hope, the understanding that sometimes broken things could be mended, that families could be built from pieces that didn't match but somehow fit together perfectly. Catherine came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking about how none of this was planned, how I found Sophie by accident, how you and I were both so broken we didn't think we'd ever feel whole again, how somehow all of our broken pieces fit together and made something beautiful." "It is beautiful, isn't it?" Catherine leaned her head on his shoulder. "I never thought I'd be here. Never thought I'd feel this way again. Sometimes I wake up in the morning and I have to remind myself it's real, that Sophie's home, that you're in my life." "It's real," David said softly. "All of it." Sophie ran over to them, her face glowing with excitement. "Mom, Dad said I could have a sleepover at his place tonight. Can I? Please?" Catherine met David's eyes over Sophie's head, and they shared a smile. Sophie had started calling David Dad about a month ago. Casual as anything, like she'd just been waiting for permission to claim him. Ethan had started calling Catherine by her first name, testing the waters, seeing if this new family configuration was really allowed. "I think that sounds perfect," Catherine said, "but only if Ethan can come here next weekend." "Deal." Sophie ran back to Ethan to share the good news. That evening, David and Catherine sat on her back porch watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. The kids were inside, already arguing about what movie to watch later. Everything was loud and messy and imperfect. It was exactly right. "I love you," Catherine said quietly. "I love you too," David replied. And sitting there in the fading light, two people who'd survived the worst and found each other on the other side, they understood what it meant to be given a second chance. Not to replace what they'd lost, but to honor it by choosing to live fully again, to build new families from old grief, to prove that love doesn't run out just because you've already loved and lost. Sometimes the people who save us are the ones we save first. Sometimes families find each other in the strangest ways. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let yourself heal, let yourself hope, let yourself love again, even when you're terrified it might break you. David had found a lost little girl in his classroom closet, and in saving her, he'd saved himself. He'd saved Ethan, and together, they'd saved Catherine too. That was the magic of it. The unexpected beauty of broken people choosing each other, choosing to be brave enough to try again, choosing to believe that happiness was still possible even after everything. The sun dipped below the horizon, and somewhere inside the house, Sophie and Ethan started laughing. Catherine squeezed David's hand, and he squeezed back, and they sat there in the gathering darkness, no longer afraid of what tomorrow might bring. They'd found their way home, all of them, together.